Cooler Master certainly has had an interesting 6 to 8 months. First, they showed off their new MasterCase H500P and Cosmos C700P at Computex, and expectations and anticipation went sky high. Then both cases were released to mediocre reviews later in the year. The C700P was pretty big and a little awkward to work in, and the H500P had issues. Now, that's not to say that the designs didn't have promise or that there weren't a lot to like about them. In particular, I had a lot of good things to say about the H500P in my initial review, but I can't deny that there were some things about the case that could have been better. Well, at CES this year, we saw the Cooler Master team proudly showing off 2 new revisions to the H500 lineup, and once again, people were excited. Does the MasterCase H500P Mesh White live up to the hype, or are we about to ride the roller coaster back down to Disappointment Town? So here it is, the new H500P Mesh White. It looks the same. That's kind of the point though. The overall aesthetic of the original H500P was a clear winner. People loved its angled front and top panels, huge side window, cable management covers around back, and twin 200mm RGB fans up front. I'm glad to see that they didn't go messing with what really drew people to this case to begin with. And I think it's fairly safe to say that this remains a handsome enclosure. It's also fairly large, coming in at 544 by 242 by 542 millimeters, so it can hold a good amount of hardware and or accessories. But just be aware that this will dominate most desk spaces, as you guys can see here. Just a quick rundown of the spec sheet sees the same configuration as the original. It can house up to 360mm radiators up front and on the top, has basically unlimited GPU and PSU length support, can house any height CPU cooler that I can think of, and has a native vertical GPU mounting option. You also get okay drive support here with 2 SSD sleds up front and a hard drive cage down below. The cable management panels on the rear are awesome to work with, but actually conflict with the areas where companies usually expand their storage mounting. So if you need to populate your next system with 8 spinning disks, this probably isn't the case for you, but you probably already knew that. The white version also swaps out your standard black framed fans for white ones, and you get white blades on the rear fan as well, which is not illuminated. I personally love white cases, but just be aware that this is a really white case. Some manufacturers toss in some black or colored accents, but the only non-white pieces here are the expansion bay covers. There will be a mesh version that comes in the original gray color scheme coming soon if the white look isn't really your bag. So if this case is basically the same thing as before, why the hype and why the need for a separate review? Well, the press on the initial H500P launch was decidedly mixed. You had some outlets like myself, OC3D, and others who praised the case's good looks, excellent cable management, and innovative design. And there were others, notably Gamers Nexus, who really hammered Cooler Master for some oversights like loose front and top panels and a weird PSU mounting situation. Also, there was the issue of airflow. Now, I'm gonna stand by my initial review and assessment of the airflow and ventilation situation, and here's why. The test system that I built had a full custom loop in it for the CPU and a vertically mounted blower-style GPU. This meant that the front panel airflow had less of an impact on my testing thermals than had everything been air-cooled and or I had used a graphics card with a recirculating cooler. So from my perspective, things seem just fine, but I trust the more in-depth testing done by Gamers Nexus and others was accurate, and case thermals were actually only middle of the pack at best. Cooler Master has decided to attack this problem head on. They've replaced the entire front acrylic panel with mesh, allowing for the huge 200mm fans to breathe freely and flood the interior of the case with fresh air. They've also placed a structural cross brace for rigidity behind this mesh panel, greatly reducing the flex that was present with the acrylic version. At the top, they've placed a clip that fastens into the frame and holds the panel in place much more firmly, without really affecting usability or accessibility. In fact, even having to press down on this clip is a much easier action to perform than what is required to remove most front case panels. In the interest of continuing to secure the case, the top piece is now held in place by a small screw at the rear. Now, normally complaints about not being able to lift the case by the top panel would be kind of ridiculous because nobody actually does that. But when taken into consideration with what was being done to the front of the case, it kind of makes sense that Cooler Master would also make this small fix as well. And now you can actually lift it by grabbing from the top and just pulling straight up. Although I don't recommend it. Probably the biggest issue that I personally had with the H500P was how you had to mount the power supply. The modular shroud had to be removed in order to access the basement area. And I found out the hard way during my review as I built and filled my loop before installing the case power supply and had the pump and reservoir mounted to the top. Now you have access through the rear instead, and this just makes things a whole lot easier. So I'm not going to go too much in depth with thermals testing here, as making a direct comparison between my first test setup on the original case and my new test setup now would be kind of impossible due to the wildly different configurations. However, I will say that my 8700K stayed around 65C under full load with the Master Liquid ML240L cooler that I have in here right now. Acoustics, I have to say, weren't really all that affected by the switch over to a mesh front panel. And that's likely because the 200mm fans that are up front that are generating the most noise that you would hear out of that area are spinning relatively slowly compared to your normal 120 or 140mm fan. As a result, they produce far less noise than you might normally expect, and the difference is really minimal, although I guess if you put your head to it, you could probably notice a very small difference because there's no longer something blocking the noise coming out of the front. So again, I guess it's really no surprise that I like this case. I liked the original. I maybe had some concerns, but they weren't nearly enough to overshadow what was really positive about building in here. The cable management is excellent, the space inside remains excellent, the water cooling support is really good, and they've done the little things that were requested of them by basically everybody who had something negative to say. When I posted my CES video and I was discussing this new version of this case, the comments down in the comment section were actually really positive. They kind of reflected that, hey, Cooler Master is listening to us, they knew we had concerns, and they made the requested changes. And this is the result. I can't say that this case is for everybody. It's still pretty big, it's still pretty bulky, it's still pretty expensive at $150. But at least it comes from a company who's listening to the consumers and hopefully has made some improvements that you guys like. So let me know down below in the comments what you think of the new H500P Mesh White. I will be doing a build in this case coming soon to the channel, so get subscribed if you're not already. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.